Hello to both of you, and thank you so much for joining me to talk about your book today. For our audience out there, I'm Carolyn Farnham. I'm a senior marketing executive at Jessica Kingsley Publishers, and I've had the absolute pleasure of working with Jenny and Jenna on their last book and their upcoming book, which is releasing later this month. Could the two of you introduce yourselves, please?
Oh, sure. Okay, hi, I'm Jennifer Brunton, and I'm the author of these two actually autistic guides, and I'm really happy to talk to you today, Carolyn. Thank you.
And I am Jenna Gensick. I'm also the co-author of these books, and really happy to be here.
Wonderful. So I know that both of you have long and storied backgrounds dealing with the autistic community, dealing with being parents, and I wanted to get into a little more detail about how your specific backgrounds inspired both your previous book and this upcoming one. Jennifer, if you would like to start.
Oh, sure. Well, I think I've always had like a really, really deep social justice attitude or bent towards social justice my whole life. And I was always kind of a little bit of a weirdo, a little bit different, and I self-diagnosed in my 20s as autistic, and I was diagnosed in my late 30s officially, but by that point it was sort of irrelevant because I kind of already knew. But my son was probably the reason that I became more engaged and activist, more engaged and more of an activist because he's autistic and he was going through the special education system in public school. And there were just a lot of things that I felt like most people's hearts were in the right place. I mean, there were some sort of district level people who really cared a lot more about like money than the kids, it seemed to me. But for the most part, teachers, paras, everybody seemed to really care, but there were just a lot of things that seemed to go wrong, whether it was sort of stereotyping him into typical, autistic traits that he didn't actually have while ignoring the ones that were, because everyone was sort of overwhelmed, or maybe some people needed a little more information, things like that. And then his peers, that was pretty rough for him in a lot of ways. There was a lot of othering and bullying that went on. So I started a blog called Full Spectrum Mama, which was kind of like a parenting blog. And little by little, I became more and more activist and engaged with all of that. Just trying to make people more, not just aware, but accepting. And then Jenna and I connected and started writing. So yeah.
And Jenna, what about you?
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about autism when I was younger, or even in high school. I think I started studying autism a little bit more seriously in college. My brother was diagnosed with what was Asperger's at the time. And so I was learning a little bit about that. I was also studying to be a teacher, to be a high school teacher. And so I had some ed psych classes. And so I was learning a little bit about autism there. But it wasn't until I had my oldest son, who was diagnosed with classic autism, that I started getting involved a little bit more seriously. Um, I studied English literature and secondary education in my undergrad, and then in grad school I studied writing, but specifically the personal essay. So I just really started getting interested in like the authority of human experience and personal storytelling and the power of storytelling, and that kind of led to my interest in like personal story research, I guess. And I have a son, a brother, and my husband was recently diagnosed. So I kind of come from this position of being a parent, a sibling, and a spouse to people on the spectrum. And so I've become more and more interested in how people's individual stories can help inform people in their own lives. And I think that I've started to find, as I did my own research, that I was finding like the best advice that I was getting for my son and living my life and helping everybody be confident autistic adults. It was coming directly from the autistic community, and it wasn't coming from neurotypical experts. So that's when I started really fueling my research and my energy into kind of focusing on autistic voices and elevating that. And I started a website that had a blog that was interviewing people who identified as autistic, and that's how I met Jenny. I found her blog, and then I asked her to be interviewed, and then we partnered from there and started working together on a lot of different projects.
Yeah.
Well, from my experience, you are a great team, and it's so interesting the fact that you have such personal connections and perspectives to add to this discussion. And at JKP, we do value those own voices, those real stories from the people who are living these lives. And it is so often that autistic people get marginalized, and giving them that voice is so crucial. They are at the forefront of the discussion and deserve to be heard as even more than neurotypical people. So as you were writing these two books, you had your first one come out, God, it feels so long ago, January
2022.
2022, yeah. And then this one coming out later this month. What, in your opinion, differentiates these two books? So which one would you offer or recommend for different audiences? Do you think everyone should read both? How do you think they differ?
Jenna, you want to start?
Sure. I think that, so our first book was really more general advice on advocacy across the entire lifespan. The net was pretty wide. We were giving people a lot of freedom to discuss kind of whatever was most interesting to them related to advocacy. We kind of started trying to figure out what people were doing with advocacy now that maybe could have been improved. So things that people thought they were doing right, but how can we kind of shape that and better align it with what the autistic community is asking for? But it was pretty general, whereas the new book is more targeted towards gaining independence and interdependence in the teen, young adult years. I would say they're both about respectful and meaningful advocacy and self-advocacy, but the second is really meant to empower families and young people who are in the middle of these important life transitions. I think that this book also is really good at kind of bringing together different advocacy communities. So self-advocates along with people who may be neurotypical parents or identify just as different people that are in family members, relatives. It kind of brings them together, and it kind of breaks down this us versus them sort of advocacy. And so I really appreciate how we kind of embrace that we're all in different spots in our advocacy journey, and there's space for that. And just trying to welcome and acknowledge the company of neurotypical allies as well as self-advocates. And I think that might be a little bit of a differentiator. And we have a good balance in that regard, I think.
Anything to add, Jenny?
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I want to also make clear that we always are centering autistic voices, like all of our contributors, and we don't cite that many other sources, but I think 99 or 100% of them are all autistic. So we're really centering autistic voices and speaking first and foremost to autistic people. But we do want other people to hear those words. And again, as Jenna said, we're trying to cast a wide net so that we're very inclusive of anyone who it might help. The first book has a lot of really strong, good principles in it. And then the second one is super practical. It's okay, when you get to college, you're not going to have the same kind of supports that you had before. what are the things that you need to do, that you need to know, and stuff like that we got. I mean, we based it entirely on what our contributors had to say. So we didn't editorialize. We just used the things that sounded meaningful and strong to us, based on very broad questions that we asked. I think that also there's a similarity in the two books in that they both start at a very micro level. They both start sort of in the home with the individual, with the person in the family, et cetera. And then they kind of go broader out. And just people sometimes take issue with the term spectrum because it implies that there's people who start here, or there's people who go all the way over here, whereas it's the neurodivergence that is called autism has so many different facets to it, and some everybody's facets are different, so it's way more complex than a spectrum. But that to me kind of tracks to the books, the way we're writing them, that like you might need your family might be super solid, or your home situation might be super solid, but you might need help in high school doing things, for the second book, it's like things that will help you become more empowered to make your own decisions, to live your own vision of independence, and the kinds of interdependence that will depend on, stuff like that. But like, for example, the college that I went to, I think if I had just like landed there in the first place, I would never have realized that I was autistic, because there's like a whole bunch of like eggheady, well, it was Bryn Mawr. So my daughter's there now, and one of her two best friends that she's made, in the first week of school is autistic. And it's like, she's like, "Oh, Mom, you got to send me your book." And her father's autistic too. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll send it to her, but she's not going to really need it right now, but she's probably going to need it when she goes out into the workplace, because some spaces are just so nurturing and open, but all of us are going to need maybe some techniques or some tools for some situations." And so that's what we were sort of aiming to do with both books, just starting micro and going out. In the second book, we have hopefully an online supplement, because we wrote too much, because there was too much we had got so much good information. So there's like the fourth section of the book is going to be free online, and that one is about like political and cultural change to support the autonomy and independence and interdependence of autistic young people. So.
And I think that's so crucial, especially for teenagers going into young adulthood. I have yet to meet a teenager that does not want to be independent and to spread their wings and fly. And it's so to give them skills and advice.
Yeah, exactly.
Jenna, you mentioned something along the lines of when you were doing your research, you were finding so many well-intentioned people that were really trying to do good, but maybe didn't have the tools or the knowledge. Was there anything else in your experience writing these books that surprised you or made you kind of think like, "Oh, wow, like I never would have thought that or know that"?
I feel like I'm constantly learning that. Like I am going through this process. When I first reached out to do this project, it was because I had started interviewing, for the first book, it's because I started doing these interviews and reaching out to people. And I was just shocked at like what I was hearing. Maybe not shocked, but I was like, "Oh, we're not supposed to be doing that. Oh, yikes, shouldn't have been saying that." Like I didn't realize it, but once it was explained to me, it made sense. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I need to like back up, and I need to like see what ableism looks like, what my own privilege looks like. I need to like take inventory of that and really learn about that before I start this work in earnest." And so when I was able to find out just some of that basic foundational work, I was actually really fortunate to get some interviews with some people who'd been doing public advocacy for a while and were willing to spend some time with me and just like do an interview and give me some time and help me learn those things. So it's always like I'm definitely evolving. So I constantly, when I try to do any talks or whenever I'm sharing about what I've learned, I try to keep this attitude of like, I am constantly making mistakes, because especially when I'm talking to other allies or other parents or people who are neurotypical, who are trying to do good work, because we want to take those good intentions and we want to put them to better use, right? We don't want people to feel really scared or really upset or offended. I mean, and it's okay to feel offended, but as long as we go through this process of doing something with that and like turning that into something positive. But the whole goal of like the work that I'm trying to do is to get people to understand that we're making mistakes and nobody's perfect, but because how we advocate for one person also may change for another, but there's some definitely fundamental truths that we can kind of agree on and work from. So we want to tell people that it's okay to make mistakes, but we have a responsibility to keep learning, and we have a responsibility to keep trying. And So yeah, and even in this book, so I was thinking about, as I was writing the second book, I was like living like what was going on. I was living the experience. My son's a junior in high school now, so a lot of these things that were being talked about were immediately relevant to us. And I found myself just in a conversation with him or my husband, we would say something to him where I would just immediately be like, "Oh, I was not supposed to say that," or "I like this is exactly what this one person I was interviewing told me was really frustrated her." And so as we were editing the book and rereading it during those times that we were kind of looking at the final draft, I was really able to kind of remind myself of better ways that I could empathize with my son. And just because just because I know and I'm intimately familiar with what helped me become successful at that stage in life, that doesn't mean that that's what he needs or what's helpful for him. So I really was able to, I think, just remind myself of how I better need to empathize, and I think that I will probably be rereading the book for the next couple of years, because sometimes hearing it once or even writing about it is not enough.
That is such an interesting answer. I like that. I didn't expect that at all, but it really is. I love that that was able to like provide introspection for you as well.
Yeah,
Jenny,
definitely.
did you have
Well, I think
anything that
that's
surprised?
why we wrote the book. We were both like, there isn't a book like this. Like, there needs to be a book about doing this thing. And I also have a son who he's 22 and he lives with me and he's got two little babies now and it's all a lot going on here. But I just like I wish I would have had this book for me. And I told something that I've really enjoyed with Jenna, and I can talk more about this under different, during a different topic, but like Jenna has really modeled a growth mindset so beautifully throughout all of this that it's really helped me like take things less personally and really just be like, oh, to sort of develop that curiosity rather than like, wait, defensiveness, um, because I'm coming from a perspective of an autistic person, right? So I'm also trying to parent, I'm also trying to do all this other stuff, but really like a lot of I guess what was surprising to me throughout the process of gathering all this information and doing the survey and looking at some of Jenna's interviews and people I interviewed that I just kept learning things that resonated with me, even though I'm an adult. I'm still, I would say, learning a lot of things that I think may come more naturally to a neurotypical person, whereas I have other things that I'm really, really strong with. But some of the things that people are saying about navigating social settings or employment, like all of those are really helpful to me, for sure.
It's truly an incredible feat that the authors of a book are learning from the book. That's
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's a
Yeah.
privilege. It's a privilege for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
truly
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
I can't wait to read it,
Oh,
honestly. From in my life, my spouse is also autistic,
oh,
and many of his family members are as well, and I've been taking
yeah.
care of two of them over the past couple months.
Wow.
So I think this would be
Mhm.
great for me to have this resource
Yeah.
as well. So, kind of in that vein, we discussed what surprised you. Did you have any favorite moments, either in the writing process or favorite moments in this newest book specifically, that kind of like touched your heart or made you like super excited? I think we've started with Jenna twice, so we can jump to Jenny if you have
Okay. Well,
something.
I would just say like one of the best things about this process has been working with Jenna because she has such integrity. Like, I have to say, I'm making you an honorary autistic person, actually. Because, like,
Oh.
the people who are so, like, so dedicated and upfront, like, I rarely find that on a level of my own sort of personal neurodivergence where I'm very meticulous and always give 100 million% and value integrity so much and solidarity. So that has been wonderful. But Jenna and I also have a lot of fun. Like we definitely have a lot of fun in the writing process.
Yes.
In
Yes.
terms of surprises, I mean, or what was really touching, you know, just the vulnerability of our contributors and respondents to the survey, like that they were just willing to just put themselves out there and be open about their struggles and their pain, I really found a lot of community in that, and but that they also are offering ideas and insights, and you know, sometimes it's stuff like you know, someone will say, you know, I have sensory challenges, so like this is a place that's really good for me to go. And so that's like a solution, like a really practical solution, like, hey, you know, if your local library has a sensory room, then it's good when you go to the library to go to the sensory room. Like that sounds really obvious, but it's actually really good advice, right? But then there's other people who are like, my family was really hard on me and really critical of me. And so what I would have needed was this kind of support, you know? So it's like, there's some advice that's very obvious and easy to follow, and other advice where people are like, maybe it'll get through to another family, you know, another parent or a teacher or someone will say, oh, okay, like this, like what Jenna was saying, you know, like, oh, I need to do this in a more accepting, inclusive, affirming, welcoming way. We got so much amazing insights in that regard.
That's amazing. I think that that vulnerability really shows how important all of your contributors felt it was to bring honesty and to share their stories. And I think that's being able to bring a community together like that is beautiful.
Yeah.
Jenna, anything to add?
Well, I certainly want to echo how wonderful it's been working with Jenny. I do just want to say that reminded me, Jenny, when you're saying that, when we first were considering working together, I remember reaching out to her and just being like, hey, I had this project, I think it would be great if you were on it. And I think Jenny replied something like, well, I think I can do this, but I need to make sure that I have enough time because I really throw myself into everything that I do. And I remember thinking, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, okay, yeah, but I do too. So I remember that not like striking me as much because I'm so used to being the person in the group project that's doing all the work. But it's so refreshing to be in a group
Yeah.
project where
Yeah.
we're both doing the work. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think in terms of being surprised, I think what some of the things that surprised me in this book, which I thought were really cool, is that while I've been interested in this like larger type of advocacy where we're advocating in our home, but also on these public scales, I think that there's things that, and it's easy to pick apart things that people are doing on wider scales, like, oh, we're using this language in this campaign, or this language is obviously, you know, ableist or whatever. We need to change these things when we're advocating this way. It was the really small things too, which I think are so often overlooked, that we can change, that I thought was really surprising. Like one example that's sticking out is there was a person who was talking about, as an elementary schooler, she would prefer indoor recess because it was so structured. You could go and she could go read, or there was something to do in the classroom, and she hated being outside because the teachers would just say, you know, oh, just go play. And it was like that simple like phrase was so stressful for her. Like she didn't know how to join anything and she didn't know what to do, and she just hated that. So like just this language of like, we think we're doing something, oh, we're just encouraging people to be friendly, or let's go, it's okay, you can do this, we're helping them out. But like that language was really triggering for her. And that was something I was like, oh, I would have never thought of that. Even as a teacher, I wasn't an elementary school teacher, but I think that's probably something that I would have done, that would have seemed natural to me to do. Like, oh, it's fine, everybody will want to play with you, it's fine. So I
I'm
think I
just
was
shaking my
surprised
head
that,
here, like, oh yeah.
yeah, right. So
No.
so I think it's like those kind of things, like hearing someone describe their elementary school experience and be like, yeah, that was not okay, that was really harmful and triggering. I think there's just little stuff like that I think there's so many different things to learn. Like Jenny said, she was still like surprised at some of the stuff people were saying. Like, I just think the more stories that come out, there's different ways we hear things, the more that we can learn and do better in more situations.
Yeah. And then the way that we're kind of working the books is like, you can take this elementary school insight and then we can look at how does that